Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the guardian of time. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a symphony of agony, and Izuku Midoriya was its soul, screaming instrument. Pain was the air he breathed, the ground beneath his ruined feet. Every nerve ending was a lit fuse, a chorus of shrieking alarms that had long since become meaningless background noise. The forest around him was a dark, jagged smear, the scent of pine and damp earth choked by the coppery tang of his own blood. He could feel the bones in his left arm grinding against each other, a sickening gravelly texture that sent waves of nausea through him. His right arm was worse. It felt less like a limb and more like a sack of wet sand filled with broken glass, a useless appendage he was still somehow dragging along. And standing before him, a monument of gleeful destruction, was Muscular. The villain was a grotesque caricature of strength, his body swathed in twitching, engorged muscle fibers that writhed like a nest of crimson snakes. A psychotic grin was stretched across his face, one eye a milky white orb, the other alight with sadistic glee. Between his monstrous form and Deku was the small, trembling figure of Kota Izumi, a child frozen in the headlights of oncoming doom. Still standing, huh? Muscular's voice was a low rumble, like rocks tumbling in a landslide. I gotta say, kid, you're persistent. Stupidly, suicidally persistent. But this is the end of the line. Deku's vision swam. He tried to push himself up, his legs shaking like newborn foals. One for all thrummed beneath his skin, a wild, untamed power that was both his only hope and the very thing destroying him. He had been using it at 100%. Channeling it through his already broken body, and the cost was catastrophic. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Kota! Deku rasped, his throat raw. Run! The boy didn't move. He was staring at Muscular, his small face pale with a terror so profound it had paralyzed him. In that moment, Deku saw it all. He saw Kota's parents, the water hose heroes, sacrificing themselves. He saw a child's hatred for a world that took everything from him. And he saw that same world about to do it again, right before his eyes. A hero saves people. That was the creed. That was All Might's creed. That was his creed. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about fame or glory. It was about the look in Kota's eyes right now, the look of a life about to be extinguished. Muscular laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He can't run. You can't even stand. I'm going to enjoy this. I'm going to crush you, and then the brat, and I'll tell everyone how the great UA's rising star died screaming for a hero who never came. The taunt was meant to break him, but it did the opposite. It forged his resolve in the fires of his own agony. A hero who never came? No. A hero was right here. I have to save him, Deku thought, the clarity of the purpose cutting through the fog of pain. Not for All Might. Not for Yue. For him. For Kota. Whatever it takes. Whatever the cost. He felt a shift within him. One for all, the sacred torch passed down through generations, wasn't just a power source. It was a legacy of will. He could feel the vestiges, the faint echoes of the past users, swirling in the hurricane of energy. He felt Nana Shimura's desperate love, the stoic resolve of the others, all culminating in this single, desperate moment. 100% wasn't enough. He knew it. Muscular had met his 100% smash and simply absorbed it, adding more muscle fibers until Deku's ultimate attack was rendered futile. He needed more. Not more power. More will. He planted his feet, the broken bones in his legs screaming in protest. He drew his ruined right arm back, the movement a symphony of tearing ligaments and splintering bone. Green lightning, wild and furious, began to erupt from his body, charring the ground around his feet. More, he commanded, not with his voice, but with his soul. I need more. He thought of his mother's worried face. He thought of All Might's encouraging smile, now a symbol of a promise he was about to break. He thought of Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, all the friends who believed in him. He poured every scrap of love, every ounce of determination, every sliver of hope into this one final act. He was channeling a power meant to be cultivated over a lifetime, releasing it all in a single, suicidal instant. The vestiges within One for All didn't just stir, they roared. They recognized the purity of the sacrifice, the absolute selflessness of the act. This was the core of their power, the very reason for its existence, magnified to an impossible degree. One for all! He choked out, blood bubbling on his lips. The lightning around him intensified, turning the dark forest into a tempest of blinding green light. The air itself began to hum, vibrating with an energy that felt ancient and terrifying. Muscular's smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in his eye. What now, you little dash? 1,000,000%! The number was impossible. It was absurd. It was a lie. But it was also the truest thing Izuku Midoriya had ever said. It was the mathematical representation of his will to give everything. Delaware. Detroit. Smash! The world ceased to exist in terms of sound and light. It became pure force. Deku's fist, a comet of emerald destruction, connected with Muscular's jaw. For a microsecond, there was nothing. Silence. Stillness. Then, reality broke. It wasn't just a shockwave that leveled a swath of the forest, turning ancient trees to splinters. It wasn't just a sound, a cataclysmic boom that was felt more than heard, a physical blow that ruptured the very air. It was something more. As Deku's power peaked at its impossible zenith, a new color bled into the green lightning. It was a brilliant, searing gold, the color of molten suns and ancient starlight. At the epicenter of the impact, where his fist met Muscular's face, the air didn't just compress. It cracked. For a single, horrifying instant, a fissure appeared in the world. It looked like a hairline fracture in a sheet of glass, but the glass was space itself. Through the crack, there was no darkness, no light, only a shimmering, non-Euclidean chaos of all moments happening at once. The sound that came from it wasn't a boom, but a high, keening chime, like a crystal goblet, the size of a mountain, shattering into infinite pieces. Koda, shielded by the sheer force of Deku's will, saw it. A jagged line of impossible gold hanging in the air, from which the green storm had been born. Muscular, his muscle armor, and the bones beneath it vaporized by the force, was launched like a cannonball, a silent projectile against the backdrop of the night sky. He was defeated. Utterly. And Izuku Midoriya, his purpose fulfilled, fell. His right arm was gone from the elbow down, not broken, but unmade. Obliterated. His left arm was a mangled ruin. His legs buckled, and his body, a vessel now completely spent, collapsed onto the charred earth. His consciousness frayed, the world dissolving into a tunnel of darkness. His last thought was a simple, peaceful one. Koda is safe. Then nothing. Or not quite nothing. He was floating. Not in water, not in air, but in a quiet, weightless void. The pain was a distant echo, like a storm happening in another country. He felt a profound sense of peace, the kind that comes after a great and terrible trial is over. Was this death? It wasn't so bad. But he was not alone. A presence coalesced before him in the gentle dark. It was a figure woven from fading starlight and the dust of nebulae. It had a humanoid shape, tall and draped in robes that seemed to contain shifting constellations, but it was profoundly, achingly ancient. Its form shimmered unstable, like a projection at the end of its power source. Where a face should have been, there was only a soft, indistinct glow, an impression of immense weariness and sorrow. This was Kronos, the guardian of time. For eons uncounted, he had been the sole watchman, the silent protector of the sacred timeline. His life force was intrinsically linked to the integrity of reality. But he was old, his power failing. For centuries, he had felt the timeline fraying at the edges, small paradoxes and incursions he was too weak to mend. He was dying, and with him, the temporal integrity of the universe. The boy's impossible punch had been a cataclysm. A surge of power so immense, fueled by a will so pure, that it had punched a hole through the thinnest part of spacetime's fabric, a microscopic flaw that Kronos had been trying to patch for millennia. The resulting fracture had been a deathblow to the timeline's stability, but it had also acted as a beacon, a screaming distress signal that the dying guardian could not ignore. He had come to seal the breach, to pour the last of his essence into preventing a total reality collapse. But when he arrived, he found the source. He found the boy, and he looked into his soul. He didn't see thoughts or memories in a linear fashion. He saw the very nature of the boy's spirit. It was a son of pure, unadulterated heroism. He saw the desperate drive to save a cat from a ditch, the frantic note-taking to help others, the unwavering leap to save Bakugo from the sludge villain without a quirk to his name. He saw the willingness to shatter his own body, again and again, not for victory, but to shield the innocent. Kronos had searched for a successor for 10,000 years. He had observed kings, philosophers, scientists, and even villains with noble intentions. All were unworthy. They all had a seed of selfishness, a desire to control, to rule, to change things for their own benefit. To be the guardian of time, one could not desire to use time. One could only desire to protect it. The power was a burden, not a tool. A curse, not a gift. And this broken, unconscious child possessed the one quality Kronos had never found in another living soul: absolute self-sacrifice. A will to save, Kronos thought, his consciousness a silent broadcast in the void where Deku's spirit now drifted. Not to win. Not for glory. To save one small life, he would risk the shattering of the world. He does not understand what he has done, but the vessel is worthy. Kronos looked deeper, past the boy's spirit, and saw the other miracle. He saw one for all. He saw the chain of souls, the 8 vestiges shimmering within the boy's core, a unique spiritual framework, a lineage of shared will. This was the key. The power of the Guardian was absolute, a torrent of cosmic energy that would atomize any normal vessel. But one for all, it was an anchor. A spiritual lightning rod. The combined will of the vestiges could ground the temporal power, weaving it into the boy's soul instead of letting it annihilate him. Kronos had no choice. The timeline was unraveling. He was fading. This was the only chance, a 1 in a trillion shot presented by a suicidal act of heroism. The spectral being raised a hand woven of faint galaxies. It drifted towards Deku's forehead. The vessel is worthy. The will is absolute. The burden must be passed. As his fingers made contact, it was not a physical touch. It was a convergence. A tidal wave of golden energy, the very essence of space-time, poured from Kronos into Deku. For the boy, it was hell. His peaceful void was shattered. He was inundated, drowned in a flood of pure, undiluted is. He felt the Big Bang detonate in his mind. He experienced the slow, graceful dance of galaxies forming. He saw the Earth, a molten ball of rock cool and sprout life. He lived a billion lives simultaneously, a trilobite skittering on the ocean floor, a dinosaur roaring at a blood-red moon, a Roman legionary marching to Gaul, a scientist in the 23rd century discovering warp travel. He heard every word ever spoken. He felt every joy, every sorrow, every birth, every death. It was a sensory and informational overload so complete that his very consciousness began to unravel, his sense of I dissolving into the cosmic static. But then, something pushed back. From the core of his being, a furious green light erupted. It was one for all, a roaring defiance against the golden tide. The vestiges, dormant and indistinct before, were shocked into a state of semi-sentience by this existential threat to their new host. A woman's voice, fierce and protective, Nana Shimura, screamed a silent NO. The green energy solidified, forming a shield around the core of Deku's identity. Another presence, older and sterner, joined her. The power of OFA wasn't just a shield, it became a set of grappling hooks. It latched onto the chaotic, infinite flood of golden energy. It did not fight the power, it began to wrangle it. It was like trying to weave a hurricane into a basket, but the combined will of the 8 heroes was strong. They pulled and twisted, anchoring the temporal energy not to Deku's fragile mind or body, but to the spiritual chain of one for all itself. The green and the gold did not repel each other. They began to merge, to braid together into something new, something stable. A synthesis of raw, generational power and the cosmic, eternal force of time. The torrent slowed to a river, then to a stream. The roar of infinity softened to a hum. As the last mote of golden light left him, the form of Kronos became utterly transparent, a final, fading echo. His duty was done. The timeline, for now, had a new pillar. "Forgive me, child," was his final, silent whisper into the void. "May you be stronger than I." And with that, The ancient guardian of time winked out of existence, his long vigil finally over. Izuku Midoriya, now something more than a boy, something other than a hero in training, drifted back toward the distant shore of consciousness. The first thing to return was the pain. It was a dull, throbbing, colossal thing, a mountain of agony he was chained to. But it was familiar. It was grounding. It meant he was alive. The second was the smell. Antiseptic. Clean linen. A sterile, chemical sharpness that could only mean one thing: a hospital, or an infirmary. He forced his eyelids open. They felt impossibly heavy, caked with grit. The light was dim, but it still made him wince. He was in a white room. Wires and tubes snaked from his body, connecting him to a series of beeping, humming machines. His arms. He didn't want to look at his arms. They were encased in thick, heavy casts from his shoulders to his fingertips, propped up on pillows. He was alive. He'd done it. Kota was safe. The thought brought a wave of relief so profound it almost sent him back to sleep. But something was different. Beneath the pain, beneath the bone-deep exhaustion, there was a new sensation. One for all was a familiar feeling, a crackling bonfire in his core, a storm waiting to be unleashed. This was not that. This was a quiet, deep, resonant hum, like a perfectly struck tuning fork vibrating at the center of his being. It felt like a deep, calm river flowing silently beneath the raging storm of OFA. It was cool, constant, and felt ancient. He closed his eyes, trying to focus on the strange, new energy. And the world fell away. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a memory. It was real. He was standing in a ruined cityscape. The sky was the color of a bruise, thick with smoke and ash. Buildings were skeletal remains, gouged and broken, and in the center of the devastation, two figures stood locked in a battle of gods. One was All Might. But not the All Might he knew. This was a skeletal, wraith-like version of his hero, blood streaming from his mouth, his costume torn. The fire in his eyes, however, was the same, a burning, defiant inferno. He was a dying star giving off one last, brilliant burst of light. Facing him was a monster. A man in a dark, formal suit, his face a horrifying mass of scar tissue, his head encased in a life support mask that looked like a skull. Tubes snaked from his body, and an aura of absolute, crushing power radiated from him, a palpable void that seemed to drink the very light from the air. All for one. Deku could hear them. He could hear the grinding of rubble as they moved, the strained, desperate breathing of All Might. He heard the villain's voice, a distorted, mocking baritone amplified by his mask. "You've gotten weaker, All Might," the monster rasped. "This pathetic form, it's a disgrace to the man who scarred me so. Where is that smile now?" "It's right here," All Might roared back, his voice thin but unbroken. "Hiding behind my anger, maybe. But I'm still here to stop you, all for one." The clarity of it was terrifying. Deku could feel the grit in the air, smell the ozone from their clashing quirks. He felt All Might's pain, his desperation, his bone-deep resolve to end this, no matter the cost. He felt the villain's cold, detached amusement. He saw the final clash coming. He saw the transfer of power, the feint, the last-ditch attack. He saw the United States of Smash forming, a blow that would contain the last embers of One for All. It was too much. It was too real. With a choked gasp, Deku's eyes flew open. He was back in the infirmary. The beeping of the heart monitor had spiked, a frantic, panicked rhythm. His body was slick with cold sweat. A nightmare. It had to be a nightmare. A stress-induced hallucination brought on by trauma and pain medication. That was the only logical explanation, but he couldn't shake the feeling. The clarity of it. It hadn't felt like a memory or a dream. It felt like he was watching it. Like watching a television screen, but a screen that showed the future. He tried to push the thought away, focusing on the rhythmic beep of the machines. He was safe. The camp was attacked, but the villains were driven back. He'd saved Kota. He needed to recover. He needed to get stronger. That was the path. That was the goal. Become the next symbol of peace. Simple. Yet, as he lay there, broken and bandaged, he felt it. The quiet, constant hum in his soul. And with it, a deep, cold dread that settled in his bones, a dread that had nothing to do with his shattered arms or the villain still at large. It was the dread of knowledge. The cold certainty that the horrifying vision of All Might's final battle wasn't a nightmare. It was a premonition, and he, somehow, was the only one who could see it. The world was no longer simple. And his journey to become a hero had just become infinitely more complex, and infinitely more lonely. The world had been saved, or so the newspapers screamed. Every television screen, every news feed, every hushed conversation in the hallways of UA High revolved around the Battle of Kamino. They showed the footage on a loop, the tectonic clash of titans, the city block turned to rubble, and the final, iconic image of All Might, skeletal but victorious, his fist raised to the heavens. A symbol of peace had fallen, but his final act had caged the ultimate evil. The world breathed a collective, shaky sigh of relief. Izuku Midoriya felt none of it. For him, the victory at Kamino was not a symbol of hope. It was the chilling prelude to a horror he couldn't unsee. He'd spent the last several days in a state of carefully controlled panic. The official story was that he was recovering from his grievous injuries, the trauma of the camp attack catching up to him. It was a convenient lie. The truth was that every time he closed his eyes he was back in that ruined city, watching his mentor bleed. The vision, that hyper-realistic nightmare, was seared onto the inside of his eyelids. His arms, now free of their casts but still webbed with angry, puckered scars, ached with a phantom pain. But that was a dull, manageable agony compared to the sharp, cold terror that had taken root in his heart. The move into the Heights Alliance dormitories should have been exciting. A new chapter, a step toward normalcy and camaraderie. His classmates chattered, decorated their rooms, and slowly began to piece their shattered sense of security back together. Izuku went through the motions. He unpacked his legion of All Might figurines, placing them on his shelves with a reverence that now felt hollow. He looked at the posters of his heroes' beaming, confident smile and felt a profound, alienating sadness. That smile was a memory now, a relic of an era that had ended. He knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that a far worse end awaited its bearer. "Deku? Are you okay?" Uraraka's voice pulled him from his reverie. He was in the common room, a half-eaten bowl of rice in his lap. Ida, Uraraka, and Todoroki were sitting with him, their expressions a mixture of concern and hesitant sympathy. Izuku blinked, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Yeah. Sorry, just thinking." Ida adjusted his glasses, his posture ramrod straight even when sitting. "It is understandable. The recent events have been taxing on us all. However, as students of UA, we must endeavor to look forward. Recovery and progress are our primary directives." "Ida's right," Uraraka added, her brows still furrowed with worry. "We're all here together now. We're safe." As she spoke, Izuku felt it. A subtle, bizarre hiccup in the world. For a fraction of a second, he saw Uraraka's mouth form the words before he heard them. It was more than just reading her lips. It was as if a snippet of the future, no longer than a heartbeat, had played out in his mind a moment early. He flinched, a barely perceptible jerk. "What's wrong?" Todoroki asked, his heterochromatic eyes missing nothing. His voice was flat, but the question held a genuine curiosity. "Nothing," Izuku said too quickly. Just a muscle spasm. My arms are still a little twitchy." He shoved a spoonful of rice into his mouth, the lie tasting like ash. It had been happening more and more frequently. Small, inexplicable glitches in the fabric of his reality. A few days prior, during a physical therapy session, the doctor had accidentally knocked a tray of metal instruments off a table. Before the clatter had even registered, Izuku had sidestepped, his body moving with an instinct he didn't possess. The doctor had praised his astounding reflexes, but Izuku had felt a cold dread wash over him. He hadn't reacted, he'd known. Later, in his room, he'd been journaling, trying to make sense of his turbulent thoughts. His favorite All Might fountain pen, a limited edition silver one, had slipped from his numb fingers. He'd reached for it, but his movements were clumsy. The pen fell, and it stopped. It hung in the air, a foot from the floor, for 3 whole, impossible seconds. It was bathed in a faint, shimmering golden aura that only he could see, a mote of dust caught in a sunbeam that wasn't there. Time in his room seemed to stretch and thin like molasses. The low hum of the air conditioner deepened into a drone. The pen was utterly still, defying gravity, a silent testament to the fact that something was fundamentally wrong with him. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the golden light vanished, and the pen clattered to the wooden floor with a sound that made him jump out of his skin. He had stared at it, his heart hammering against his ribs. The quiet, resonant hum in his soul, the one he'd felt since the forest, pulsed in time with his panic. This wasn't a quirk. This wasn't one for all. This was something else. Something alien. Now, sitting with his friends, the fear of it was a constant, pressing weight. He felt like a fraud, a ghost at their table. They were talking about their training, about the upcoming provisional license exam. They were living in the present, planning for the future. He felt unstuck, adrift in a sea of moments, with the terrifying vision of Kamino as his only lighthouse. His isolation was cemented during his next meeting with All Might. They met in one of the teachers' lounges, a space that smelled of old coffee and paperwork. Tashinori Yagi looked smaller than ever, swimming in a loose-fitting yellow suit. His smile was still there, but it was fragile, exhausted. He was no longer a pillar of strength, but a man trying to teach his successor how to build his own foundation. Young Midoriya, he began, his voice a quiet rasp. How are you holding up? Truly? The question was a physical blow. Izuku wanted to scream. I'm terrified. I think I'm losing my mind. I saw your future, All Might, and I can't bear it. Instead, he nodded. I'm okay, All Might. Just tired. It's a lot to process. Your retirement. Everything. Tashinori sighed, sinking into a worn armchair. I know, my boy. I know. I've put a terrible burden on you. To have the world suddenly look to you, to the next generation, it is a heavy weight, and your performance at the camp, your fight with Muscular. He leaned forward, his skeletal face etched with a deep, paternal concern. Your willingness to destroy yourself is your greatest strength, and your most terrifying weakness. You threw away everything you had learned about control. 1,000,000%? It was a miracle, yes. A miracle that saved a life. But it was also reckless to the point of suicide. We must work on that. We must temper that impulse. Izuku could only nod, his throat tight. Temper the impulse? That impulse, that suicidal, desperate act, had done more than just defeat a villain. He was beginning to understand that it had broken something, not just his body. It had broken the world in a way only he could perceive. You seem distant, my boy. All Might continued, his gaze piercing. More than just tired. You're looking at me like I'm already a memory. Talk to me. The urge to confess was overwhelming. To pour out the story of the hovering pen, the premonitions, the nightmare vision of Kamino. But how could he? How could he tell his dying mentor that he had seen the moment of his death? It would be the cruelest form of torture. I'm sorry, Izuku mumbled, staring at his scarred hands. I'm worried. About living up to you. About being strong enough. It was another lie, but it was one All Might could understand. The hero's weary face softened. That is a burden we will shoulder together. I am no longer the symbol of peace, but I am still your teacher. I will be here for you, every step of the way. Do not forget that. Izuku walked back to the dorms that evening feeling more alone than ever before in his life. The conversation had built a wall of glass between him and his idol. He could see him, hear him, but he could no longer truly connect. He was harboring a secret so monumental it eclipsed the secret of One for All itself. He shut the door to his room, the manufactured cheerfulness of the All Might merchandise mocking him. He sank onto his bed, his head in his hands. The humming in his soul was louder tonight, a persistent, low-frequency thrum that vibrated behind his eyes. He had to know. He had to understand what was happening to him. What are you? He whispered into the silence of the room. What did you do to me? As if in answer, the air grew cold. The change was instantaneous and absolute. The hum of the building's ventilation ceased. The distant chatter of his classmates in the hall outside vanished. A profound, tomb-like silence descended, so complete that Izuku could hear the blood rushing in his own ears. The light from his desk lamp seemed to freeze, the dust motes in its beam hanging perfectly still. His breath hitched. He looked up, his heart seized by a primal fear. Standing in the center of his room, where nothing had been a second before, was a figure. It was the being from his unconscious void. Tall and spectral, its form was a shimmering mirage of fading starlight. Its robes were not cloth, but woven constellations, swirling with silent, distant galaxies. There was no face, only a soft, sorrowful glow, an impression of age beyond all comprehension. It was transparent, and through its shimmering form, Izuku could still see the posters on his wall, now muted and gray. The being radiated an aura of profound stillness, the source of the unnatural silence that had claimed the room. Izuku scrambled backwards on his bed, pressing himself against the headboard, his eyes wide with terror. What are you?" The being did not speak. There was no sound, no movement of a mouth. But words bloomed in Izuku's mind, clear and resonant, as if they were his own thoughts, yet utterly alien. "Be at peace, child. I intend you no harm." The mental voice was neither male nor female, old nor young. It was the voice of a calm, ancient ocean. "You're from the forest," Izuku stammered, his voice a thin, reedy thing. "After the fight. I saw you. You were not meant to. Your consciousness was supposed to be dormant. But the link between you and the vestiges of your power is stronger than I anticipated." "Yes. I was there. I am the reason for the changes you have experienced." Izuku's mind raced. "A villain? A new kind of quirk? What did you do to me?" he demanded, a flicker of defiance cutting through his fear. "I saved us all. And in doing so, I passed my burden to you." The figure seemed to sigh, a wave of cosmic weariness washing over Izuku. "My name is Kronos. Or it was. I was the guardian of time." The words made no sense. Guardian of time? It sounded like something out of a comic book, not real life. "I don't understand," Izuku said, shaking his head. "You will." Kronos's mental voice was patient, like a mountain explaining itself to a stone. "For eons, it has been my sacred duty to observe and protect the integrity of the timeline, to ensure the linear progression of cause and effect, to guard against paradoxes and temporal incursions that would unravel the fabric of reality." As Kronos spoke, an image formed in Izuku's mind, projected there by the guardian. He saw a vast, shimmering river of light, flowing from a brilliant, singular point of origin into an unknowable, misty delta. This river, he understood, was time. But I grew old. My energy faded. The river began to fray at its banks. Small cracks appeared, threatening to splinter into cataclysmic paradoxes. I was too weak to mend them all. I was dying, and the timeline was dying with me. The image of the river changed. Izuku saw tiny, dark fissures spiderwebbing through the golden light, threatening to shatter the entire flow. Then came your moment of crisis. In the forest. Your power, one for all, is a unique confluence of will and energy. When you pushed it to an impossible, selfless limit, you did not just break your body, you punched a hole in the very fabric of space-time. A fracture. It would have been the final death blow to our reality. The vision of the golden, jagged crack from the forest flashed in his memory. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. I came to seal that breach with the last of my essence. But when I arrived, I sensed you. I sensed your spirit. A will of absolute sacrifice. The one quality required for this burden. In a universe of beings who would seek to control time for gain, for power, for selfish love, you were willing to destroy yourself to save a single, insignificant life you barely knew. You were the only worthy vessel I had found in 10,000 years of searching. The spectral figure raised a hand, and Izuku instinctively flinched. I had no choice. I poured my power, my duty, my very being into you. Your unique power, the chain of souls within one for all, acted as an anchor. It grounded my essence within you, preventing your annihilation. It intertwined the power temporal with your inherited quirk. The figure's form flickered, growing more transparent. And so, my watch ended, and yours began. Izuku Midoriya, you are the new guardian of time. Izuku stared, his mouth agape. The story was so immense, so fantastically insane, that his mind simply refused to accept it. "No," he whispered. No, that's impossible. I'm a high school student. I'm supposed to be a hero. The symbol of peace. I can't be, whatever you're talking about. The two are not mutually exclusive. But one duty is now paramount. The mental voice became sterner, imbued with the weight of cosmic law. Your powers are awakening. The stuttering of moments, the brief glimpses of the immediate future, these are but ripples. Soon you will be able to see the river in its entirety. But to wield this power, you must understand the laws. They are absolute. They are immutable. They are all that stand between existence and oblivion. Kronos' form seemed to solidify slightly, demanding Izuku's full attention. The first law is to observe. An image flooded Izuku's mind. He was standing outside the river of time, watching its flow. He could zoom in on any point, any moment. He saw the birth of stars, the rise and fall of empires, the life of every single person, from beginning to end, laid out like a scroll. You will see all paths, all possibilities, all moments. You must know what is, what was, and what must be. Your perception is your greatest tool. You must be the ultimate historian, the ultimate witness. This knowledge is your weapon and your burden. The vision faded, and Kronos continued. The second law is to protect. A new image. A rogue wave, black and oily, rose up to crash against the river of time. From the darkness, twisted creatures made of paradox and temporal decay clawed at the banks, trying to divert its course. The timeline is not without its enemies. Beings from outside of time, paradoxes given form, fools who acquire temporal power and seek to rewrite history for their own selfish ends. They are chronivores, reality breakers. You are the shield that stands against them. You will feel their presence as a dissonance, a sickness in the flow of time. You must act. You must hunt them. You must protect the sacred timeline from their influence. This, Izuku could almost understand. It was like being a hero, but on a cosmic scale. Fighting villains. Protecting people. It was a terrifying concept, but it resonated with his core purpose. Okay, he breathed. Okay, I can do that. I can fight. Then you must understand the third law, Kronos' voice interrupted, and Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. It is the most important, and the most cruel. It is the price of this power. The figure's form shimmered with a profound sadness. The third law is, you must not interfere. The words landed like stones in the silent pool of Izuku's mind. What? You are a guardian, not a gardener, Kronos explained, his tone unyielding. The sacred timeline, the river you must protect, is composed of trillions upon trillions of interconnected events. Every birth, every death, every choice, every tragedy. They are all threads in a single, impossibly complex tapestry. You are forbidden from altering the events within that tapestry. But that's insane! Izuku shot back, his voice cracking. If I can see things happening, tragedies, people getting hurt. I'm a hero. I'm supposed to intervene. I'm supposed to save people, and you will save them. From threats they can never perceive. But you cannot save them from their own timeline. Think of it as a surgeon. A surgeon cannot cut out a healthy organ to make a patient feel better. The events you know, the rise of All for One, the attack on your training camp, the battle at Kamino, these are established points in time. They are load-bearing pillars of reality. To alter one, even with the best intentions, could bring the entire structure crashing down. The vision of All Might, bleeding and broken, flashed in Izuku's mind, sharper and more vivid than ever. No, he said, his voice trembling with a rising tide of horror and rebellion. No. I saw All Might. I saw his fight with All for One. He's going to die. If I have this power, I have to stop it. I have to save him, and what would be the cost? Kronos' voice was cold, relentless. Perhaps in the timeline where you save him, All for One escapes. Perhaps he uses that freedom to plunge the world into 1,000 years of darkness. Perhaps the hope forged from All Might's final stand, the hope that inspires a new generation of heroes, never materializes. Perhaps billions die so that one man may live. You would be trading a tragedy for an apocalypse. This is a calculation you are not permitted to make. To save one life, you would unravel the existence of countless others. That is the hubris of mortals, and it is the one sin a guardian cannot commit. The logic was airtight. It was monstrous. It was utterly, inhumanly cruel. The full weight of the revelation crashed down on Izuku. This wasn't a power. It was a prison. He was being given the eyes of a god, and the hands of a ghost. He was to be the eternal, helpless bystander to all of history's suffering. Tears began to well in his eyes. He thought of the future he'd seen in glimpses, the future he'd read about in Sir Nightie's files, a future he might soon see with perfect, agonizing clarity. He thought of Sir Nightie himself, impaled and dying during the Shai Hasaikai raid. A tiny nudge of time, a microsecond of frozen reality, and he could be saved. But he was forbidden. He thought of Eri, a little girl suffering unimaginable torment, her body being endlessly rewound and broken by overhaul. He would have the power to literally turn back her clock to a time before her suffering began. But he was forbidden. He thought of the countless lives lost in the coming war against the Paranormal Liberation Front. He could warn them, help them, evacuate cities. But he was forbidden. The tears now streamed freely down his face, silent trails of despair. The heroism that had been the defining feature of his existence, the very quality that had made him worthy, was now the source of his eternal torture. He was being asked to betray his own soul, every single day, for the rest of his life. "I can't," he choked out, his body trembling. "Please take it back. I can't do this. I'm not strong enough." "Your strength is why you were chosen," Kronos stated, his form beginning to fade, the silence in the room beginning to recede. "Not the strength of your body, but the strength of your heart. The strength to bear this burden so that no one else has to. The strength to watch the world burn, and to save its ashes so that it may be reborn." The figure was almost gone now, a mere suggestion of starlight against the backdrop of his bedroom wall. The distant sounds of the dorm began to filter back in, muffled and surreal. "The knowledge is yours now, Guardian. The laws are set. The enemies of time will soon sense a new power in their way. Be vigilant. Observe. Protect." Kronos' final thought echoed in his mind, a solemn, final command, "And do not interfere." Then, he was gone. The cold air rushed back to normal temperature. The hum of the building returned. The light from his lamp seemed to flicker back to life. It was as if nothing had happened, but everything had changed. Izuku Midoriya sat on his bed, surrounded by the bright, smiling faces of his childhood hero, and wept. He didn't weep for his broken body or the end of All Might's era. He wept for the boy who had dreamed of saving everyone, because that boy had just died. In his place was something new, a lonely watchman, a silent protector, a hero cursed to hold the whole of forever in his hands, and forbidden from ever changing a single, agonizing second of it. His war was not against villains of flesh and blood, but against his own heroic heart. And it was a war he knew he was doomed to fight, and lose, every single day for the rest of his life. The gymnasium at UA, affectionately nicknamed Gym Gamma, was a cavern of controlled chaos. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, ozone, and Kirishima's recently hardened skin. For Izuku Midoriya, it had always been a sanctuary of sorts, a place where theory met brutal, unforgiving practice. A place to get stronger. Now, it felt like a cage. He was sparring with Zero, whose tape shot out in unpredictable, whipping arcs. In the past, Izuku would have been meticulously analyzing vectors, calculating velocities, his mind a whirlwind of strategic possibilities. Today, his mind was a storm of a different kind. Observe. Protect. Do not interfere. The three laws, imparted by the ghostly Kronos, were a mantra of torment. They echoed in the hollow spaces of his thoughts, a constant, chilling reminder of his new reality. He was supposed to be focusing on Zero's attacks, but his attention kept drifting, snagged on the tapestry of time he could now faintly perceive. He saw the sweat bead on Zero's brow a millisecond before it formed. He felt the subtle shift in Kirishima's weight across the gym as he prepared to block one of Bakugo's explosions. This new perception was a constant, low-level hum of information, a stream of data that was utterly useless for his current life. It was like trying to listen to a single conversation in a stadium where every single person was screaming, "Midoriya, focus!" Zero called out, yanking his tape back as Izuku simply stood there, a glazed look in his eyes. You almost let me wrap you up like a birthday present. Izuku blinked, shaking his head as if to clear water from his ears. Sorry, Shiro. Lost in thought. From across the gym, an explosion rocked the padded walls. Lost in thought, my ass! Bakugo roared, blasting himself away from Kirishima. The damn nerd's been jumpy as a frog on a hot plate for weeks. What's the matter, Deku? Scared you might actually break a sweat without shattering every bone in your body? The taunt was classic Bakugo, but for the first time, it didn't sting. Izuku's problems were so far beyond Bakugo's comprehension that the explosive teen's anger seemed almost quaint, a relic from a simpler time. He was about to offer a placating response when it happened. It began not as a thought or a vision, but as a physical sensation. A wave of intense vertigo washed over him, making the solid floor of the gym feel like the deck of a ship in a typhoon. The air grew thick and sour, like the taste of ozone and spoiled milk. The hum in his soul, the constant vibration of his guardian power, spiked violently, morphing into a shrill, dissonant shriek that only he could hear. It was a migraine of the soul, a deep, fundamental wrongness rippling through the fabric of reality. He stumbled back, clutching his head. The world flickered. For a split second, he saw Shiro's tape retracting back into his elbow before he'd even fired it again. He saw Bakugo flying backwards, the explosion imploding into his palm. Whoa, Midoriya, you alright? Kirishima called out, his usual cheerful tone laced with concern. I don't feel so good. Izuku mumbled, his stomach churning. The feeling wasn't random sickness. It was a signal. It was a pull. Kronos' mental voice echoed in his memory. You will feel their presence as a dissonance, a sickness in the flow of time. This was it. His first mission. An anomaly. He needed to get out of there. Now, I need some air. He gasped, already moving towards the exit, his steps unsteady. I will accompany you to the infirmary, Ida announced, power walking to intercept him with alarming speed. It is paramount to ensure any potential illness is addressed by a professional. No! Izuku's voice was sharper than he intended. No, I'm fine. I just need to be alone for a minute. Fresh air. Uraraka was at his side, her hand hovering near his shoulder, her face a mask of worry. Deku, you're pale as a ghost. Let us help. The genuine concern in their faces was a knife in his gut. He had to lie to them. The first of what he knew would be a lifetime of lies. Please, he said, his voice softening, pleading. I'm okay. Really, just claustrophobic all of a sudden. I'll be back in a bit. He didn't wait for their response. He half ran, half stumbled out of the gym, leaving his bewildered friends in his wake. The dissonant pull was stronger outside, a nauseating magnetic tug leading him southeast, towards the quieter, residential districts of Muzurifu. He ignored the burning in his lungs and the questioning stares of other students as he ran, a teenager on a secret, impossible errand. He followed the sickness. It led him several kilometers from UA's campus to a sleepy neighborhood of small businesses and apartment complexes. The temporal disturbance was centered here, palpable and thick. To his new senses, the area was shrouded in a faint, shimmering haze, like heat rising from asphalt, but this haze felt greasy and unnatural. Time itself was blurry. He saw a pigeon take flight from a telephone wire, only for its ghostly echo to repeat the action a second later. He saw a woman dropping a bag of groceries, the oranges scattering across the pavement in a dozen overlapping, spectral trajectories. The epicenter was a small, unassuming branch of the Muzurifu Municipal Bank. Police cars were already on the scene, forming a loose perimeter. From his vantage point behind a bakery, Izuku could see officers taking cover, their guns drawn. A bank robbery. Mundane. Except it wasn't. He focused, pushing past the nausea, and tried to observe. He let the river of time flow through his perception. What he saw made his blood run cold. He saw a police car screech to a halt at the corner. He saw the officers jump out. He saw a shot fired from within the bank. And then, the scene jumped. The police car was suddenly a block away again, just turning the corner. The officers were back in their seats. The dropped groceries were back in the woman's arms. It was a loop. A small, localized bubble of reality, stuck on repeat. A man burst out of the bank's front door. He was short, wiry, and wore a cheap ski mask. He held a bag of money in one hand and a pistol in the other. He fired a panicked shot at the approaching police car, then screamed in frustration. No, not like that! Too slow! He slapped the side of his own head with his free hand, and a sickly, golden-green light flared around him for an instant. Reset! The world snapped back. The man was inside the bank again. The police car was a block away. The loop had restarted. Izuku watched, hidden and horrified, as the loop played out 4 more times. Each time the villain, if he could even be called that, tried a different escape. He tried the side door, but tripped on a loose tile. Reset. He tried to take a hostage, but the woman would faint. Reset. He was a pathetic perfectionist, armed with a quirk far too powerful for his meager intellect. He wasn't trying to create a time loop. He was an amateur who kept hitting the rewind button in a panic, and the tape was getting tangled. Kronos' words came back to him. If left unchecked, it could fray the fabric of reality. This small, pathetic robbery was like a tiny snag in the universal tapestry, one that would eventually unravel everything around it. He had to stop it. His first instinct was the heroic one. Charge in. One for all, full cowling. Disarm the villain, end the threat. It was the Deku way. He channeled the familiar green energy, his body crackling with power, and dashed from his hiding spot. He was a blur of motion, covering the distance to the bank's entrance in a heartbeat. He saw the villain emerge, saw the surprise in his eyes behind the mask. He was already raising his fist for a Detroit smash. Reset. Izuku found himself back behind the bakery, his body still thrumming with the charge of One for All, the echo of his failed attack fading from his muscles. The police car was turning the corner again. The villain was still inside. He remembered everything, but for the rest of the world, it had never happened. He gritted his teeth in frustration. Brute force was useless. The villain's quirk was a perfect, immediate counter. As long as the villain could think and move, he could always hit reset, observe, protect. He couldn't just be a hero. He had to be a guardian. He forced himself to stay put, quelling the frantic urge to act. He leaned against the brick wall of the bakery, closed his eyes, and truly watched. He let the loop play out again, and again, and again. He wasn't watching the villain anymore. He was studying the loop itself. The loop was approximately 1 minute and 47 seconds long. It started the moment the villain, whom he mentally dubbed Jikanma, decided to make his escape. It ended when Jikanma, frustrated with the outcome, activated his quirk. Izuku memorized every detail. The civilian traffic patterns. The exact moment the woman dropped her groceries. The flight path of the pigeon. The timing of the police arrival. He internalized the rhythm of the fractured moment, becoming the only conscious audience to this bizarre, repeating play. He was so absorbed in his observation that he didn't notice the new arrival until a familiar, dry voice cut through the air behind him. Problem child. Izuku whirled around, his heart leaping into his throat. Standing there, his perpetually bored expression belying the sharp intelligence in his eyes, was Shota Aizawa. His teacher was in his full hero costume, capture weapon coiled around his neck, goggles pushed up onto his forehead. Mr. Aizawa! What are you doing here? Patrol route, Aizawa said, his eyes scanning the scene, then flicking back to Izuku. A more relevant question is, what are you doing here? You were reported to be feeling ill. This doesn't look like the infirmary. The lie died on Izuku's lips. Aizawa's gaze was like a physical weight. I was on my way back. He stammered, knowing how flimsy it sounded. I heard the commotion and my instincts took over. Aizawa's expression didn't change, but Izuku could feel the suspicion radiating from him. Your instincts led you to hide behind a bakery instead of clearing the area or reporting to the authorities? You've been here for several minutes. I've been watching you. You've just been watching. Izuku's mind raced. How could he explain? How could he possibly articulate that he was waiting for the right moment in a repeating time loop? Before he had to formulate another lie, Aizawa's attention was drawn back to the bank. Hostage situation. Low-level villain with a time-related quirk, According to the dispatcher, the responding officers are confused. They report a feeling of déjà vu, moments repeating. This is unstable. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. Stay back, Midoriya. This is out of your league. But it wasn't. It was the very definition of his league. As Aizawa moved to find a better vantage point, the loop reset again. Izuku felt the familiar lurch. Aizawa froze, a flicker of disorientation crossing his face. What was that? He murmured, shaking his head slightly. He'd felt a faint echo of the shift, but his mind, unbound by guardian powers, rationalized it away as a dizzy spell. This was Izuku's chance. He knew he couldn't explain his power, but he could use it. He had to stop Jikanma without Aizawa, or anyone else, understanding how. He had to make it look like a new application of One for All. An evolution of his analytical mind. Okay, he thought, his panic solidifying into cold resolve. I can't brute force it. And I can't let Mr. Aizawa see what I'm really doing. So, I have to be a ghost. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He waited for the next loop to begin. This time, he didn't watch. He acted. The loop began. 1 minute and 47 seconds on the clock. At the 5-second mark, a gust of wind would blow the front door of the bank inward slightly. He knew this from his observations. He channeled the barest minimum of guardian energy into his being. The world didn't freeze, but it thickened, time turning to syrup for a single nanosecond. It was just enough. He darted from behind the bakery, a silent green blur. To any observer, he would have been perfectly masked by a passing delivery truck. He slipped through the bank door in that sliver of an opening, the door closing behind him with a soft click. He was inside, invisible. The bank interior was chaos. A handful of terrified hostages were huddled on the floor. Jikanma was pacing by the vault, stuffing the last of the cash into his bag. A lone security guard, an older man, was hiding behind a counter, trembling. At the 32-second mark, the guard would try to be a hero. He'd draw his pistol. Izuku was already moving. He didn't run. He flowed, his movements perfectly timed to place him behind pillars and desks, out of everyone's line of sight. He saw the guard's hand shaking as he raised his gun. The guard would fire, miss Jikanma, and the bullet would ricochet off the marble wall, striking the ceiling and causing a light fixture to fall dangerously close to the hostages. Izuku couldn't let that happen. As the guard's finger tightened on the trigger, Izuku reached out, not with his hand, but with his will. He focused on the half-second of time around the bullet as it left the barrel. He didn't freeze it. He rewound it. For him, it was a complex act of temporal manipulation, pulling a single thread back through the needle. For the rest of the world, nothing happened. The guard's finger spasmed, his shot firing a fraction of a second later than it should have. The new trajectory caused the bullet to fly wide, embedding itself harmlessly in the high wall far from anyone. The guard stared at his gun, confused. Jikanma spun around, startled by the shot. The hostages flinched. No one saw the flicker of golden light that had clung to the bullet for a nanosecond. From his perch on a rooftop across the street, Aizawa watched the entrance, waiting for the villain to emerge. He saw nothing. He just heard a single, muffled gunshot from within. Strange. The police report said there had been multiple shots in previous episodes. Inside, Izuku continued his silent dance. Jikanma was panicking. The gunshot had thrown off his timing. He would now grab the nearest hostage, a young woman, and burst out the front door at the 1 minute, 12-second mark. Izuku needed to be faster. He saw Jikanma's path, a line of intent projected into his temporal sight. He moved to intercept, not the villain, but his path. A puddle of spilled water from a fallen cooler lay on the floor. Jikanma would step just to the side of it. Izuku tapped into his power again, a minuscule, targeted pause in time, focused entirely on a single water bottle that had rolled under a desk. He nudged it with his toe. The pause ended. The bottle rolled silently out into the center of the puddle. Exactly on schedule, Jikanma grabbed the terrified hostage and bolted for the door. His foot hit the puddle, right where the water bottle now lay. His ankle twisted, sending him sprawling. The bag of money flew from his grasp, and his ski mask was knocked askew. The hostage scrambled away, unharmed. Jikanma screamed in a rage of pure frustration. No and oh, stupid, useless! He scrambled for his pistol and slapped the side of his head, his hand glowing. Reset, but Izuku was ready. He knew the villain's tell. The reset was triggered by a physical gesture combined with his panicked intent. He had to interrupt the gesture. In the split second that Jikanma's hand moved towards his head, Izuku acted. He pushed off the floor with a burst of full cowling, a silent explosion of green lightning. He wasn't aiming for the villain, he was aiming for the bag of money. He snatched the bag out of the air, landed silently behind the main counter, and dropped the bag at the feet of the shocked security guard. The entire sequence, from the villain's fall to the bag's recovery, took less than a second. Jikanma, his hand an inch from his temple, froze. His bag was gone. He looked around wildly, his unmasked eyes wide with confusion and fear. The loop was broken. He had been interrupted mid-panic. For the first time, he was stuck in the consequences of his failure. From the outside, Aizawa saw the front door burst open. Not with the villain, but with a terrified woman who ran screaming towards the police line. Something had changed. His gut told him it was the problem child. He grappled onto the bank's roof, preparing to make his entrance. Back inside, Jikanma was cornered and confused. His rhythm was gone. The world was no longer his private rehearsal space. He was just a common criminal in a bank, surrounded. He raised his pistol, waving it wildly. Who's there? Show yourself. That was the cue. Izuku exploded from behind the counter, a tempest of green energy. Now, he could be a hero. It's over! He shouted, his voice ringing with newfound confidence. Jikanma fired, but Izuku was already moving. Thanks to his temporal senses, the villain's movements were laughably slow, his aim telegraphed seconds in advance. Izuku didn't just dodge. He flowed around the bullets, his movements impossibly fluid and precise. To Jikanma, it was like trying to shoot at smoke. Izuku closed the distance, his fist drawn back for a targeted, non-lethal blow. He feinted a high punch, and just as Jikanma flinched, Izuku dropped low and swept his legs out from under him. The villain crashed to the floor, the gun skittering away. Before he could even think about his quirk, Izuku was there, pinning his arms. It was over. The temporal haze over the district dissipated. The sickening dissonance vanished, replaced by the clean, crisp hum of normal, linear time. Izuku took a deep, shuddering breath. He had done it. He had protected the timeline. Just then, Aizawa dropped silently from a vent in the ceiling, his capture weapon already lashing out to bind the subdued villain. The police swarmed in seconds later. The scene was a flurry of activity. The hostages were tended to, the villain was cuffed, and Izuku Midoriya found himself standing in the middle of it all, the unwilling center of attention. Aizawa approached him, his expression unreadable. He had seen the last 10 seconds of the fight. He had seen Midoriya's impossible evasions, the flawless takedown. Problem child, Aizawa said, his voice dangerously quiet. Explain. Your file says you have a strength enhancement quirk. It does not say you have precognition, Izuku's heart hammered. He had a cover story, but would it be enough? I've been working on it, sir, he said, trying to sound earnest and slightly out of breath. It's not precognition. I've just been focusing on analysis. Watching fights, memorizing patterns. I observed the villain from outside, predicted his probable movements based on his panic. It's just enhanced battle sense, a new application of one for all. It helps me process things faster. It was plausible. It leveraged his known reputation as a hopeless hero nerd. It was also a complete fabrication. Aizawa stared at him for a long, silent moment. Izuku could feel his teacher's analytical gaze dissecting him, searching for the lie. Your movements were too perfect, Aizawa stated flatly. You didn't react. You moved before he even aimed. That's not analysis, Midoriya. That's certainty. I got lucky, Izuku insisted, forcing a shaky, triumphant grin. It all just came together. Aizawa didn't buy it. Izuku could see it in his eyes. But he also had no other explanation. He let out a long, weary sigh. We'll be having a long talk about this later. Go. Get checked out by the paramedics. You're still on the sick list, remember? Izuku nodded, a wave of exhaustion, physical, mental, and spiritual, crashing over him. He had won. He had saved the day in a way no one could ever appreciate. He walked out of the bank into the now calm street, the cheers of the rescued hostages feeling distant and hollow. Later that night, back in the sterile quiet of his room at Heights Alliance, he saw the news report. A low-level villain with a time-warping quirk, apprehended by the pro-hero Eraserhead with assistance from a UA student. His involvement was downplayed, but the footage was there, a blurry green streak moving with impossible grace. From the room next door, he heard a frustrated roar and a loud thump against the wall. "That damn nerd!" Bakugo's muffled voice yelled. "That's not footwork! That's not a new move! What the hell is that?" Izuku sank onto his bed, the weight of his secret pressing down on him, suffocating him. The victory felt like ashes in his mouth. He had saved a sliver of reality, protected the timeline from a dangerous anomaly. He had been a perfect guardian, and in doing so, he had taken another giant step away from everyone he cared about, into a cold, solitary world where he was the only one who knew the truth. His reward for saving forever was to be utterly, completely alone. The air in the briefing room was thick with tension, a suffocating blanket woven from grim determination and palpable fear. A collection of the country's finest pro-heroes stood assembled, their colorful costumes a stark contrast to the stark, monochrome data splashed across the holographic displays. Sir Nightai, gaunt and severe, stood at the head of the room, his every word a precisely sharpened dart. Izuku Midoriya stood amongst them, a boy in a room of giants. He was there as part of the UA work-study contingent, alongside Mirio, Uraraka, Kirishima, and Tsuyu. He should have felt a thrill, a sense of awe at being included in such a critical operation. Instead, he felt like a condemned man listening to the details of his own execution. Every word Sir Nightai spoke was a hammer blow against the fragile walls of his composure. The Shai Hasaikai. The Yakuza. Kai Chisaki, the man known as Overhaul. And Eri. The name was a physical pain. Since his first, brief encounter with the little girl in the alleyway, her terrified eyes and trembling hands had haunted him. But his haunting was different now. It was no longer just the guilt of a hero in training who had failed to act. It was the omniscient agony of a guardian. Since his encounter with the time-looping bank robber, his powers had settled. The constant, nauseating vertigo had subsided, replaced by a clearer, more terrifying perception. The river of time was no longer just a vague sensation. He could see its currents, feel its eddies. And when he focused on a specific person or event, the scroll of their existence would partially unfurl in his mind's eye. When Sir Nightai said Eri's name, Izuku didn't just see the memory of the trembling girl in the alley. He saw flashes of her entire, horrific life. He saw a laboratory, cold and sterile. He saw needles, gleaming and malevolent. He felt the phantom sensation of his own body being disassembled and reassembled, of his own existence being rewound, over and over, a cycle of pain with no beginning and no end. He felt her despair, a cold, dark ocean threatening to drown him, and he saw the future. He saw the raid. He stood rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles white. He could feel Uraraka's worried glance, but he couldn't meet her eyes. If he did, she might see the howling vortex of horror behind his own. "Our objective is twofold," Sir Nightai stated, his voice cutting through Izuku's internal torment. "First, to apprehend the entirety of the Shai Hasaikai and neutralize their quirk-destroying drug operation. Second, and most importantly, to rescue the girl, Eri." Rescue her, Izuku thought, a bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling in his throat. "I could rescue her right now. I could stop time, walk into their compound, and carry her out. They'd never even know I was there." The thought was a seductive poison. It was so simple. So easy. It was what any hero would do. It was what he was supposed to do, but the third law was a set of iron chains around his soul. Do not interfere. The ghost of Kronos, though no longer a physical presence, was a constant weight in his mind. His final warning echoed endlessly. You would be trading a tragedy for an apocalypse. Was Eri's salvation worth an apocalypse? The question was monstrous. To his heroic heart, the answer was a defiant yes. One life, this innocent, tortured life, was worth anything. But the guardian in him, the ancient, weary part of his soul that could feel the fragile interconnectedness of all things, screamed no. He knew, with the terrible certainty of his power, that this raid was a nexus point. It was a load-bearing pillar. The events that would unfold within the Hasaikai compound were critical. Ares' rescue here, at this specific time, by these specific people, would trigger a cascade of consequences. It would solidify bonds between heroes. It would push Mirio to a new height of heroism, even in loss. It would forge Izuku's own resolve. And most importantly, Ares' unique quirk, once controlled, would become the key to undoing untold damage in the future. A future he could see flickering at the edges of his perception. A future of war and devastation where a girl with the power to rewind would be the world's last, best hope. To save her now, to take the easy path, would be to steal that future. So he stood there, his face a stony mask, and listened to the plan. A plan he knew was flawed. A plan he knew would lead to ruin and death. The raid began as a controlled storm, heroes smashing through the compound's defenses with overwhelming force. For the others, it was a chaotic, adrenaline-fueled assault into enemy territory. For Izuku, it was a waking nightmare he had already lived 1,000 times. His temporal senses were on fire. The compound wasn't just a physical space. It was a map of tragic inevitabilities. He could see the branching paths of every hero, every Yakuza thug. He saw where traps would spring. He saw where walls would shift. He saw, with agonizing clarity, the exact moments of impact, of injury, of death. He moved with his team, his body on autopilot. His combat instincts, now supercharged by his strange precognition, made him an incredibly effective fighter. He would call out warnings a second before a wall shifted. "Uraraka, left!" He'd shout, and she'd instinctively leap away just as the section of wall she was touching contorted into a spike. He'd shove Kirishima forward, a moment before the ceiling above him collapsed. To the others, it was uncanny. He was a whirlwind of breathtaking instinct and analysis. "Dude, Midoriya, your danger sense is on a whole other level today!" Kirishima yelled, hardening his arm to block a surprise attack from a hidden panel. Izuku didn't answer. Every save, every shouted warning, was a careful calculation. He was operating on a razor's edge. He could prevent minor injuries, redirect attacks, as long as the larger flow of the battle remained unchanged. He was a sheepdog, nudging the flock, but forbidden from stopping the wolves he knew were waiting ahead. Then came the first unbearable choice. They were separated, the ground falling away, plunging them into a confrontation with Toga and Twice. The fight was confusing, disorienting. But Izuku's mind was elsewhere. He could feel it, a cold spot in the timeline, drawing nearer. Mirio. Mirio had phased ahead, alone, a shining beacon of hope charging towards the heart of the darkness. Izuku could see his timeline unfurling. He saw Mirio, brilliant and untouchable, single-handedly defeating two of Overhaul's strongest subordinates. He saw him reach Eri, shield her with his own body, his smile a defiant sun in the suffocating gloom. And then he saw the gun. The quirk-destroying bullet. He saw the split-second decision Mirio would make, to take the bullet himself rather than let it strike Eri. He saw Mirio's permeation quirk, his life's work, the core of his identity as a hero, dissolve into nothingness. Izuku's breath hitched. His heart hammered against his ribs. I can stop it. The thought was a physical force. He could do it. He could interfere. He could create a micro-pause in time, just long enough to appear at Mirio's side and knock the gun away. It would be so fast, no one would even see him. Mirio would be confused, but he would be whole. Lemillion would be saved. The temptation was a physical agony. Mirio was his senior, his friend, a man he admired more than almost anyone. A man who was more worthy of one for all than he was. To stand by and let him be crippled, it was a betrayal of everything he believed in. He could feel the guardian power thrumming within him, a vast, neutral ocean of energy, waiting for his command. He could feel the vestiges of one for all stirring, a chorus of heroic spirits screaming at him to act. Nana Shimura's voice was the loudest, a mother's cry to protect the bright-eyed boy who was so much like her own lost son. He took a half step, coiling his muscles, the green lightning of one for all beginning to crackle around him. He could abandon his team here, break from the script. He could save his friend. But then, the cold, merciless logic of the Guardian reasserted itself. He saw the branching path. The alternate timeline. In the timeline where Mirio keeps his quirk, he is too powerful. He defeats Overhaul too quickly, before the villain is pushed to his monstrous final transformation. The battle is less destructive. Sir Nightai is not fatally wounded. On the surface, it is a better outcome. A perfect victory, but the ripples spread. Without the visceral, public horror of Overhaul's final form, the threat of the Yakuza is underestimated. The hero community doesn't unify in the same way. More importantly, Eri, rescued by an untouchable hero who barely broke a sweat, never sees the true meaning of sacrifice. She never sees Izuku, broken and bleeding, fighting with everything he has for her sake. She never forms the deep, foundational bond with him that will be crucial for her to later gain control of her own devastating power. In this better timeline, Eri's quirk remains a chaotic, untamable force, a time bomb waiting to go off. And Mirio, in that timeline, his spirit, untested by true loss, remains bright but brittle. He never learns the profound strength that comes from being a hero even without a quirk, the strength he would need to inspire others in the dark days to come. Izuku saw it all in a sickening, instantaneous flash of insight. Mirio's loss was not an end. It was a crucible. It was a necessary sacrifice on the altar of the future. His coiled muscles relaxed. The green lightning faded. He grit his teeth so hard his jaw ached, a low, animalistic sound of pure anguish escaping his throat. Uraraka looked at him, her eyes wide. "Deku? What's wrong?" "Nothing," he bit out, the word tasting like poison. "We have to keep moving. We have to catch up." He turned and fought, his movements precise and brutal. He fought against Toga and twice, he fought against the shifting labyrinth, but mostly, he fought against the screaming voice in his own soul that called him a coward and a traitor. He had just condemned his friend, and a part of him died with that choice. The next test came sooner, and it was sharper. They finally broke through to the central chamber. The scene was exactly as he had foreseen. Mirio, quirkless and battered, was still standing, shielding Eri. Overhaul was there, a figure of cold, clinical rage. And Sir Nightai was dueling him, his movements a fluid, predictive dance. Izuku's temporal senses were a symphony of horror. He saw everything. He saw his own arrival. He saw Eri, terrified, run back to Overhaul, believing it was the only way to stop the fighting. He saw Overhaul absorb his subordinate, transforming into a multi-limbed monstrosity, and he saw the spike. He saw the exact moment. Overhaul, enraged by Sir Nightai's perfect predictions, would bypass his defenses with a sudden, massive earth spike from an unexpected angle. He saw it pierce Nightai's torso, a fatal, gut-wrenching wound. The moment was approaching. It was seconds away. This was different from Mirio. This was death. Sir Nightai, the man who had looked at him with such disappointment, who had believed Mirio was the better choice. The man who was All Might's former sidekick, a pillar of the hero world. His death would send shockwaves of grief through everyone. Izuku was closer this time. He was on the battlefield. He could do more than just pause time. A single, well-aimed 5% smash at the floor could change the trajectory of the spike. It would look like a stray shot in the heat of battle. Plausible. Deniable. No one would know. He could save him. Do not interfere. The law was a physical wall in his mind. But this was Sir Nightai, All Might's friend. He saw the alternate timeline again. If Nightai lived, his foresight quirk would become an invaluable asset in the coming war. Too invaluable. The heroes would become dependent on it. They would grow rigid, relying on his predictions instead of adapting, instead of fighting with desperate, unpredictable courage. His survival would paradoxically make them weaker, more brittle. And his death would serve as a brutal, necessary lesson to Izuku himself. A lesson about the limits of foresight, the fallibility of destiny, and the importance of fighting to change a future you believe is set in stone. Sir Nightai's death was the tragic, ironic key to unlocking Izuku's true potential as a hero who defies fate. It was a lesson Izuku, as a guardian, already knew. But Izuku, the boy, needed to learn it. His mind was tearing itself in two. The guardian and the hero were at war, and his soul was the battlefield. He saw Overhaul's arm gesture. He saw the ground begin to bulge. No, the hero screamed. You must. The guardian commanded. Tears were streaming down Izuku's face, hidden by the grime and shadows of his mask. His body was frozen, locked in a state of absolute paralysis by his warring imperatives. He could see the path to saving Night Eye. It was right there. A single step. A single punch. He clenched his fists, the leather of his gloves groaning in protest. His knuckles were bone-white. A strangled sob tore from his lungs, and he did nothing. The spike of rock erupted from the ground. It was immense, jagged, and impossibly fast. It tore through the air with a sound like ripping earth. Sir Night Eye, his attention focused on Overhaul's primary limbs, couldn't react in time. His eyes widened in a fraction of a second of surprise, of acceptance. The spike hit him. It lifted him from his feet, a gruesome, terrible impalement through his lower abdomen. A spray of crimson decorated the gray stone behind him. The world seemed to fall silent for Izuku. The sounds of battle faded to a dull roar. All he could see was Sir Night Eye, suspended on that rocky spear, a look of shocked pain on his face. Izuku had watched him die. He had possessed the power to stop it, and he had let it happen. For the sake of the timeline. For the greater good. For a future he could see but couldn't promise. The choice broke something inside him. The boy who had leapt without a thought to save Bakugo from the sludge villain, the boy who had shattered his body to save Koda, was gone. In his place stood a monster of cold, cosmic calculation. The rest of the fight was a blur of righteous fury. The grief, the guilt, the self-loathing, he channeled it all. When Eri ran to him, when he finally took her into his arms, it wasn't just about saving her anymore. It was about validating the horrific choices he had just made. Her rescue had to be worth it. It had to be. With Eri on his back, her rewind quirk pouring into him, counteracting the self-destructive toll of one for all at 100%, he became a force of nature. He was no longer just a hero, he was a guardian's wrath made manifest. He saw every one of Overhaul's attacks before they were launched, his movements a perfect, seamless dance of avoidance and devastating counterattacks. He wasn't just fighting Overhaul. He was fighting the timeline he had been forced to protect, punishing the villain for the part he had played in Izuku's damnation. The fight ended with a blow that was less a punch and more a localized cataclysm, a physical expression of all his pain and rage. He defeated Overhaul, but the victory was hollow. In the aftermath, amidst the rubble and the wounded, he knelt by Sir Night Eye's side. The medics were doing what they could, but Izuku knew it was useless. He had seen the man's thread being cut. Sir Night Eye was lucid, his gaze unfocused. He looked at the heroes gathered around him, at Mirio, at All Might, who had just arrived, and finally at Izuku. With his own foresight, his life flashing before his eyes, Sir Night Eye saw the future he had predicted, his own death. But as his eyes rested on Izuku, he saw something else, something his quirk couldn't fully comprehend. He saw a flicker of the battle Izuku had just fought. Not the physical one against Overhaul, but the internal one. He saw a glimpse of the golden river of time. He saw a boy standing against an apocalyptic tide, making an unbearable choice. He saw a profound, ancient sadness in the teenager's eyes, a sorrow that belonged to a being a billion years old. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but he understood the weight of it. Midoriya. Sir Night Eye whispered, his voice faint. He reached out a trembling hand, and Izuku took it. The hand was cold. I see, such a heavy burden. Izuku choked back a sob. Don't let it break you. Night Eye's eyes found Mirio, and he offered his final words of hope, telling him he would be a fine hero. He saw a future where Eri would smile again. Then, his eyes glazed over, and the light within them went out. The grip on Izuku's hand went slack. He had won. He had rescued Eri. He had followed the plan. He had obeyed the laws. He had never felt more like a villain in his entire life. The distance between him and his friends was no longer just a feeling of isolation. It was a chasm, carved by the blood of the sacrifices he was forced to make, a chasm no one else would ever see. And he knew, with a dreadful certainty, that he would have to stand on his side of it, alone, forever. The days following the Shai Hasaikai raid were a study in dissonance. On the surface, life at Yui was inching back toward a fragile semblance of normalcy. The news cycles were dominated by the heroic victory, the dismantling of a major Yakuza faction, and the miraculous rescue of a little girl. Mirio Togata was hailed as a hero of unparalleled spirit, his smiling, quirkless face a symbol of indomitable will. Izuka Midoriya was lauded as the rising star who had gone toe-to-toe with a monster and won. To his friends, Izuka was a phantom. He sat with them in the bustling common room of Heights Alliance, a ghost at the feast. He would have a bowl of katsudon in his lap, the steam rising to fog his glasses, but his eyes would be 1,000 miles away. Uraraka would be recounting a funny story from her patrol, her voice full of life, and Izuka would be staring at the wall behind her, his expression one of profound, distant sorrow. "Deku?" she'd ask, her story faltering. "Are you listening?" He would blink, his focus snapping back with a painful jolt. "Yeah. Sorry, Ochako. That's really funny." But he hadn't heard a word. He'd been watching the temporal echoes in the room. He could see faint, shimmering after images of past events, layered over the present like transparencies. He saw an echo of Bakugo yelling at the television a week ago, a ghost of Ida practicing his stances, a spectral All Might laughing heartily at a joke that had been told last month. His new senses were turning the vibrant, living dorm into a mausoleum of memories, and the weight of it was crushing him. The guilt was a physical entity, a cold, heavy thing that lived in his chest. Every time he saw Mirio, saw the unshakable optimism in his friend's eyes, he felt like a fraud. He saw the hero Lemillion could have been, a timeline he had personally pruned away. Every time he visited the hospital and saw Eri, her small, pale face still a mask of fear despite the safety surrounding her, he was reminded of the price of her rescue. He had traded Sir Nitai's life for this. He had stood by and watched his mentor's mentor die. The choice, logical and necessary as the guardian in him knew it to be, was a cancer eating away at the hero. His friends tried to breach the wall he built around himself. Ida would approach with structured schedules for mental recuperation. Todoroki would sit with him in silence, a quiet, stoic presence offering unspoken support. Uraraka, with her boundless empathy, would simply look at him, her eyes asking a million questions he could never answer. "It's more than the raid, isn't it?" she asked him one evening, finding him alone on the dorm's veranda, staring out at the darkening campus. He flinched, turning to face her. "What do you mean? The fight with Muscular, you came back different. Quieter. After Kamino, you were even more distant. Now, you look like you're carrying the whole world on your shoulders, Deku, and you won't let any of us help you hold it." Her words were so perceptive, so full of genuine care, that they were like a physical blow. He wanted to tell her. God, he wanted to break down and confess everything. The ghost of Kronos, the laws of time, the unbearable choices he was forced to make. He wanted her to tell him he was still a good person, but the third law was absolute. This burden was his alone. To share it would be to endanger her, to endanger the timeline itself. "I'm just tired, Uraraka," he said, the lie flimsy and worn. "It's been a lot. I'll be okay. I promise." The look she gave him was one of deep, heartbreaking disappointment. She knew he was lying, but she respected him enough not to push. She just nodded, squeezed his arm gently, and left him alone with his ghosts. He retreated to his room, the one place he could drop the facade. The All Might merchandise felt like an accusation. The posters of the smiling, triumphant hero seemed to mock his own grim reality. He wasn't on the path to becoming that. He was on a darker, lonelier road. He sat on his bed, the familiar, low hum of his guardian power a constant companion. He tried to meditate, to organize the chaotic influx of temporal data, but it was overwhelming. He felt frayed, stretched thin across too many moments. That's when the wrongness began. It started like the precursor to the bank robbery anomaly, a wave of vertigo and a sour taste in the air. But this was different. This wasn't a localized ripple. This was a seismic shockwave. The hum in his soul didn't just turn dissonant, it screamed. It was a high, tearing shriek of pure agony, as if the river of time itself was being ripped in half. The room began to dissolve. The All Might poster on his wall rippled, the hero's face distorting into a grotesque sneer before melting like wax. The solid wood of his desk flowed and warped, its grains swirling into impossible patterns. He looked at his hands, and saw them flicker between their current scarred state, the smooth, unblemished hands of his younger self, and the gnarled, wrinkled hands of an old man. A sound filled the room, a cacophony of a million clocks ticking out of sync, blended with the shattering of glass and the whisper of dying stars. A profound cold seeped into the space, a cold that didn't just chill the skin but seemed to leach the very heat from his soul. In the center of his room, reality tore open. It wasn't a neat portal. It was a violent, jagged wound. A black, vertical fissure crackled into existence, a line of absolute nothingness that seemed to drink the light. It was edged with a flickering, sickly purple-gray energy, and through the tear, he didn't see another place, but a chaotic maelstrom of overlapping moments, a dinosaur roaring, a skyscraper collapsing, a star being born, all happening at once in a silent, kaleidoscopic horror. A force, immense and undeniable, erupted from the fissure. It was not a physical wind, it was a gravitational pull on his very existence. It latched onto him, onto the unique temporal energy he now possessed, and began to drag him in. "No!" he yelled, planting his feet. He flared one for all, full cowling, green lightning erupting around him, fighting against the inexorable pull. For a moment he held his ground, a beacon of defiant green against the encroaching void. But it was like trying to anchor himself in a hurricane with a fishing line. The force was cosmic, absolute. His feet slid across the floor, leaving charred grooves in the wood. His books, his figurines, his very bed frame began to distort and stretch towards the fissure, their matter being unmade at the edges. With a final, desperate cry, his grip on reality failed. He was lifted from his feet and pulled, screaming, into the heart of the temporal storm. The world vanished. He was tumbling through chaos, through a torrent of sensory data that made his first encounter with the Guardian's power feel like a gentle rain. He saw the beginning and the end of the universe in the same instant. He felt the joy of 1,000 wedding days and the despair of 1,000,000 deathbeds. His identity, his sense of Izukamidaria, began to fray, to dissolve into the infinite noise. But the vestiges of One for All, the chain of souls bound to his, formed a shield. They were an anchor of coherent will in the sea of chaos. They held the core of him together as he was spat out of the storm. He landed hard on a surface that was neither solid nor liquid. It was crystalline, and it chimed with a low, resonant frequency. He pushed himself up, his body trembling, his mind reeling. He was no longer in his dorm room. He was in a place that defied geometry and physics. He stood on a vast, crystalline plain that stretched to an unseen horizon. Above him, the sky, was a tapestry of frozen lightning, immense, silent bolts of light, in every color imaginable, crisscrossed the darkness, branching and weaving into an infinite, celestial web. Some were brilliant, blindingly bright rivers of gold, others were thin, fragile threads of silver. Some were dark, choked with black and crimson motes. He realized with a gasp of awe and terror what he was looking at. They were timelines. He was standing in the nexus, the space between realities, the engine room of existence. The air, if it could be called that, hummed with 1,000,000,000,000 whispers, the ghosts of choices not made, the echoes of potential futures, the faint sighs of dead timelines. He was wearing his all-might pajamas, his feet bare against the crystalline floor. A scared, lost boy in the cathedral of forever. "Where am I?" he whispered, his voice sounding small and thin in the immense space. "You are in my domain, little guardian." The voice was not a sound. It was an intrusion. A wave of pure, concentrated nihilism that washed over his mind, feeling like sandpaper and static. It was cold, ancient, and filled with a bottomless, chilling amusement. Izuku spun around. A figure was coalescing from the shadows between the frozen rivers of time. It wasn't solid. It was a glitch wraith, a being seemingly woven from television static and decaying data. Its form flickered and shifted, one moment a tall, gaunt man in a tattered black coat, the next a vortex of gray dust and corrupted pixels. But through the shifting form, details remained constant. a shock of pale, bluish-white hair, a horrifying, chapped-lipped smile, and hands. All over its body, spectral, disembodied hands clung to it like morbid barnacles, some clutching its arms, its shoulders, one even obscuring half of its face. Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew that hair. He knew that posture. He knew those hands. Shigaraki! He breathed, the name a curse. The figure solidified slightly, its flickering smile widening. It was Tamura Shigaraki's face, but aged, eroded. The skin was unnaturally pale, cracked like old porcelain, and the eyes were not human. They were pits of cold, red light, glowing with an intelligence that was both ancient and utterly insane. I was, the being hissed in his mind. I was Tamura Shigaraki. A broken toy for a broken man. But that name is a dead thing. A fossil from a timeline that has already been erased in my mind. You may call me Paradox. What is this? What have you done? Izuku demanded, instinctively dropping into a fighting stance, the green lightning of one for all flickering weakly around him. He felt drained, disoriented. Paradox chuckled, a sound like grinding stones in Izuku's head. Done? I am simply correcting a flaw in the system. The ultimate bug fix. But you are an unexpected variable. A new security program, installed by the old, failed administrator. I felt your presence during the Hasaikai fiasco. You were like a stone thrown into a still pond, your choices sending out such interesting ripples. I had to meet the one who so dutifully, so painfully, upheld the status quo I seek to shatter. You're the one behind the anomalies. Izuku realized, the pieces clicking into place. The bank robber. His quirk awakening like that wasn't an accident. An accident? Paradox's form dissolved into a swarm of gray motes, before coalescing again a few feet closer. There are no accidents. Only cause and effect. I merely gave a pathetic man's power a little nudge, a test. To see how the new guardian would react. And you performed beautifully. You mended the tiny tear, preserving the grand, tragic, pointless narrative. So predictable. What do you want? Izuku growled. To offer you the truth, Paradox replied, his mental voice taking on the tone of a twisted philosopher. I have lived outside of time for longer than your species has had language. I have seen it all. Every laugh, every tear, every war, every hug. And it is all meaningless. A chaotic, random sequence of pain and fleeting joy, built on a foundation of cosmic unfairness. Some are born with power, some with none. Some find love, some die alone. Heroes rise, villains fall. It's all just noise. A story full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. He gestured with a glitching hand at the brilliant timelines above them. My predecessor, All for One, wanted to rule the story. Your predecessor, All Might, wanted to be its greatest hero. They were children fighting over a sand castle. I have a grander ambition. I don't want to rule the story. I want to delete it. Horror, cold and absolute, washed over Izuku. This was a madness far beyond All for One's lust for power. This was a desire for universal annihilation. You're insane, am I? Paradox tilted his head, the hand on his face shifting to reveal more of his cracked skin. Let me show you how I came to this enlightenment. The world around Izuku dissolved. He was no longer in the Nexus. He was in a war-torn city, a future version of Muzutafu, even more devastated than the Kamino he had witnessed in his vision. He saw a future version of himself, older, stronger, leading a team of heroes. Todoroki wielding fire and ice on a massive scale, Bakugo a living artillery shell, Uraraka manipulating gravity to float entire city blocks. And they were fighting him. Tamura Shigaraki, at the peak of his power, a true singularity of All for One and decay. He witnessed the final battle. He saw his future self, in a desperate, final gamble, defeat Shigaraki. But instead of killing him, the heroes, in an act of what they thought was mercy, used a combination of quirks to cast his defeated form out of the normal flow of time, into the void between realities. A prison from which he could never escape and never harm anyone again.